This hour of broadcasting brought to you by TwoWayRadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. Brought to you by Vigilant Impact. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to equipping the vigilant, those men and women who stand watch, keeping our houses of worship and places of faith safe. We believe church safety and security must be a ministry first and have engaged, servant leaders who continually strive for excellence and teams of motivated volunteers that are always training. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, Dr. James McGarvey and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, churchsafetyguys.com, and on the original Church Security app. Download it today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your ministry.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and I am joined on this broadcast, as usual, by my co-host, Mike.
How are you, James?
You know what? I am doing really good. It was a really busy weekend.
Yep.
But everything... I have to stop and think about what I actually did now that the weekend's almost over. But everything actually went pretty well for Sunday and certainly for yesterday.
I'm in survival mode because I'm single parenting for the weekend. So
that's right. Your wife left you with the kids. That's awesome.
Visiting her best friend, and yep. So that adds an additional layer of situational awareness.
Well, and it's funny because I was thinking about that today, and we haven't, like this week, we haven't talked as much as we normally do, and part of that's because of that. I've been trying not to bug you too much. But I was going to say, definitely, as crazy as it sounds, this is my parenting advice, because my kids are a tad bit older, and that would be that, enjoy it. I know it. I know some days it's not it's not enjoyable, but I remember those days. My wife used to travel quite a bit, and about two to 3 weeks out of the month. And so I would be at home with the kids and working and directing their activities, etc. And I remember those days, and I can tell you that I kind of miss them because the kids were more dependent. Now they're all spread out all over the country and all over Ohio. So, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, I can't believe it. Here it is, and we're in August already, and that means right around the corner. I mean, what's super odd is we're actually crossing paths more than once in a single year. So I know we're usually in different corners of the country here, but next week we'll be in the same state, we'll be in the same zip code, we'll be at the same conference. Yeah, on Friday. It's great. Not next week anymore. Not even next week. It's actually this week. Yeah. Wow. Okay. It's flying. Yep.
For sure. So we actually will both be at the Church Security Conference down in Dallas. There's more information on our website, so you can visit churchsafetyguys.com and then go to conferences and training. But we will be with Chuck Chadwick and his wife down in Texas. And I haven't been to Dallas in 20 years. So everybody, believe it or not, I'm a big fan of the JFK assassination. And so I've done, over the years, I've done quite a bit of research on that. And someone came up to me today and they said, "Oh, you're going down to Dallas. Are you going to go see the park and the book depository and all of that good stuff?" And
the grassy knoll.
And I'm like, you know what? I've been studying that grassy knoll since I think I was in high school. So I don't know. We're probably not going to have time, but it's a good thought. You keep trying to get me down to Texas, and
hey, there's a lot happening in Texas. There's a lot of big cities here, and we're growing rapidly.
We are. So we're looking at a couple of different things we've got on our burners and our plates. We're looking at a conference. We're working on a shortened conference, like half day up in New England. We're trying to put that together in October, and then in March we're looking at doing one out in St. Louis as well. So we're definitely. I thought we were going to be slowing down, and we're not. We're winding up. So good stuff for sure. But if this is your first time joining us, thanks for hanging out. As always, you can visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com for some great resources, and you can also download our church security app, which is on the Google or iOS store. And there's also plenty of resources there as well. And we'd love to help you out if we can. Feel free to reach out to us through our website or through Facebook groups or however is most convenient. But that's pretty much what we do. And I had a church reach out to me last night, and it was pretty late, but they had a situation in Central Ohio. There was a situation with an individual that it was in the news pretty significantly. An individual that they believed had committed 4 murders was on the loose and evading police. And it happened about 2 miles from one of the churches that I've been at in Dayton, and I've talked to them quite a bit. And so they reached out to me last night and said, "Hey, these are precautions. Police are saying this guy is out of the state," which later, early this morning, I think it was around 1 a.m., they caught him down in Kansas. So that was a good thing. But the church was concerned, and so they reached out to me and kind of threw together a plan and said, "Hey, does this seem reasonable, or are we overreacting?" And I looked at it and said, "No, absolutely not. You guys don't know what's going on, so you need to be ready." Because if an individual if he decided to come back or decided to stay or whatever, they were definitely prepared. So a lot of times, and that's kind of what's interesting about us, and for sure in this ministry. But a lot of times we get requests through email, through messaging, through phone calls, and it's not always at regular hours. Sometimes it's a last minute. That message was like at 11 o'clock last night. So I'm like, okay, he's got a Sunday service tomorrow. We got to talk about this and figure out what we can do. And I was tied up today with stuff at church. And so otherwise I probably would have tried to go out there and give them a hand, which we've done as well at times. So
ours was not very eventful. We're really looking at more of a bolo for a certain truck because of a divorce situation and a protective order and wife and kids at the church. Make sure that the spouse doesn't show up. So no issues, things like that, but nothing extreme. So
cool. A quiet Sunday is always a good thing.
Exactly.
I'm convinced of that, but it doesn't remove the focus on praying for protection and wisdom and praying for a quiet Sunday and being prepared. So on that note, being prepared and being prepared for the unexpected, I will go ahead and bring our guest in, which is Lieutenant Colonel Edmunk. So welcome, sir, and again, thank you for joining us on this broadcast.
Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Welcome, Ed.
So if you could just kind of go through, I know you've done a crazy amount of training and had quite the career experience, but if you could, for folks that maybe don't know that, just kind of explain and go through that chronologically, and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. I joined the military out of high school, grew up here in Arkansas, and did a little over 24 years active duty in the U.S. Army. The last 20 of that as an armor officer, so in and commanding units with tanks and cavalry units. Mm-hmm. And a lot of how I approach this topic of the active shooter comes out of how military officers are trained to approach combat operations, because they're very similar.
Sure.
So I got out of the Army in 2007, retired, taught high school for 4 years in 2 different states. So that helps me a lot when I work with schools, because I know what they can't, I know what it's like in the building. I have some experience there. And I was a deputy sheriff in Louisville, Kentucky, before I moved back down here to Arkansas. And I'm a part-time police officer here and run a small gun training facility, Last Resort Firearms Training, where we do a variety of gun training, but kind of this active shooter thing has taken kind of a specialty of mine. And I got into it as I ended my military career and got into teaching. And I was subject to policies, and leaders were telling me how to react to an active shooter that seemed not only that they told me to do things that I didn't think would help, but it would actually make things worse. So that is sheer curiosity. That's what got me started into researching this about 14 years ago. And for about the last 11 years, I've offered training, anything from educational presentations to consulting to hands-on gun training to counter this specific threat.
Awesome. So you, like, as you were going through it, just your past experience in the military, that kind of stuck out to you as some of the newer, or some of the ways that we handle active shooters, that just kind of manifested itself and said, to you, said, this doesn't make sense, or maybe we could do this a little bit different.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's what we train, at least combat arms officers, infantry, armor, aviation, artillery, the guys that do the fighting. We train the officers to do this, to look at a threat or a potential threat and define it. Define it. What are its tactics, techniques, and procedures? What are its weapon systems capabilities? What are its weaknesses? What are its strengths? What are its most likely courses of action? So we define that threat, and then we define the environment in which we expect to fight this threat. And then given that, we develop the best operational plan we can to defeat that threat as rapidly as we can with the fewest amount of casualties. Every combat operation, we want to take as little time as possible, to do it as quickly as possible, and have the least amount of casualties. And then we develop a training plan to train our fighters execute the operational plan that we just developed to defeat the enemy that we have defined. And that's absolutely not what I was seeing as I got into teaching and then other jobs in law enforcement, of what we were telling people to do. It just seemed absolutely counter to that.
That's pretty fair. I mean, Mike and I have had discussions, even going through some of the run, hide, and fight, and just some of the catchy acronyms and catchy phrases to try and help people remember that we've kind of, obviously, I mean, we haven't done as much research as you have on the topic, but we've kind of wondered a couple of times, like, does this make sense? Like, how does that work?
Well, yeah, I'm a 42-year-old retired lieutenant colonel, but I'm a brand new snot-nosed rookie teacher. And they're telling me, okay, Mr. Monk, if we announce active shooter, or if there's an active shooter, then what you're supposed to do as the adult, as the staff member, as the authority figure, is to gather all your kids in your classroom and pack them into a corner and hold them in a tight group in the corner, so that when he enters your room, he could not ask for a better target. And I just, when military people get attacked, we don't tell everybody to group up into a tight group, so that it's the exact opposite.
Sure.
And when I suggested, well, maybe that's not the right, well, this is what the government tells us to do. Every school does this. This is the approved plan. This is, yeah. And as one principal told me, this has worked for us for 20 years without a problem. It works great. Well, that's because the active shooter hadn't come here yet. It doesn't work real good when the active shooter comes there. Not wearing your seatbelt works fine when before the drunk driver slams into you. Yep. And when I suggested, I'm in the first floor, and I got a window. Why don't we just get the kids out the window and tell them to run to the post office down the street? And they said, no, we can't do that because it would take hours to get accountability if we tell everybody to run away. So their concern was this administrative thing of accountability, which isn't that serious. Instead of, if they're all dead on my classroom floor, it's quite easy to account for. Yeah. And then when I suggested, well, if you're going to make me keep the kids in the room, which I wouldn't have done anyway, well, then at least let us fight him when he comes in, not all cower in the corner. And they said, Mr. Monk, that we can't do that. Our insurance would go up. If we had a stated policy that we would have violence and fight, our insurance would go up. So we can't do that. And it just, again, I was told to do things that not only wouldn't help, but they would probably cause a lot more death and victims should an active shooter come there. So that's, I got into that. I was like, what? My gut, my history, my training is telling me this is lunacy, but maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't really understand what's going on. So that's what got me into studying it. But here we are, how many years later? And we keep getting 30, Stockton, California, the elementary school was attacked, 35 people shot. And the only reason it wasn't 40 or more is because the guy, as many of them do, he just decided to clock out and quit. And so if we didn't know the problem before then, of course we should have, but if we didn't know, we knew in 1989 for schools. And then we had 10 years to figure out a better thing to do, and we didn't. And so Columbine happened 10 years later, and we had 34 kids shot in a school. And the only reason it wasn't over 100 is because those guys just weren't that aggressive. And so surely now we'll fix it. And of course, we all said we would, no more Columbines, we'll fix it. Well, 19 years later, we have Parkland. And we had 34, the exact same number at Columbine. Why? Because we're doing the same thing. Yeah. If a doctor keeps treating a patient with leeches and they keep dying, at some point you have to say maybe leeches aren't the treatment. Not, well, I'm not using the right type of leech, or maybe I should have used a couple of more leeches. Maybe leeches aren't. If we're in Major League Baseball and I'm a pitcher and you're a batter, and every time I throw you a high curveball, you knock it like 500 feet out of the park into the next zip code, maybe I stop throwing you a high curveball, somewhere down the road, because it's not getting me the results I want. And then we had Parkland. And then what did we just have? We had Uvalde. And we're in the 30s. Then we keep getting the same horrible results. Now we do a lot. It's not that we don't do anything. We do a lot, because the saying is we have to do something. So we do a lot. We act surprised. We act shocked. We cry. We put teddy bears on fences. We light candles. Politicians point fingers at organizations and other politicians. They look outraged. They cry with the victims. Governors appoint commissions to study the problem, and they issue in a report. And then we feel really good because we actually did something. And then we go back to sleep. And then when the next one happens, we go through that same cycle again. And nobody changes anything. Everybody is still doing run, hide, fight. Everybody is still doing lockdowns. I'm talking about schools here, but fortunately, one of the few places that I've seen progress is in churches. And from my limited perspective, after Sutherland Springs, that's the one in my limited exposure to churches in my small area. That's when the vast majority of the churches, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and that we're going to do something. We're not going to sit here and let this happen and wait on somebody else to come fix it in 10 minutes.
For sure. We talk to, Mike and I both talk to churches all the time that are still caught back in the 80s with some of that thought. And unfortunately, I would love to say that it's more than it used to be. And I think there are more churches today that are at least trying to, but part of the reason, at least from my research, part of the reason that churches are embracing it more is because we have a different generation of leadership coming up. We have a younger generation of church leaders now that saw the reaction of things back in the 90s and the 80s. And so when they get into the church or that position where maybe they're a pastor or a priest or whatnot, they're a little bit easier, at least from our experience, they're a little bit easier to convince to say, hey, you know what, it's not if this is going to happen anymore, it's when this happens, and you guys need to have a plan to respond to this.
Yeah, it may not happen to you, but it's gonna happen to somebody.
Sure.
Right. I would agree that Sutherland Springs was kind of a tipping point within the church world as well. I think what we're still seeing, though, is that up through that point and even after that, there's still a tremendous spirit of fear that has driven a lot of the creation of teams. And those teams aren't necessarily built with the right foundation and the right intentions and the right direction, the right leadership, the right balance. There's so many different problematic things that we've seen that are out there. There's even some that, you know what, are swinging straight towards the, hey, let's address the active shooter, when even in a church scenario, it's a 1% scenario. So they're not even factoring in the other 99. So it's kind of like the team that only trains for the Super Bowl but doesn't train for the season. It literally is kind of that I've seen.
Yeah, when I talk to churches, I'm not a church security expert by any chance, and church security is this big and active shooter is this big, and it's got an extremely low priority, but it's probably the most catastrophic. Agreed. Should it happen. And so I tell churches, you really got to work on the other things. And actually, I think the active shooter is very catastrophic, but I actually think it's fairly simple. It's a very simple mechanical problem. It'll be stressful and fearful, but there's one guy with a gun shooting innocent people. That's not that hard to figure out. It's the other times a church might have to physically put their hands on somebody that's not a deadly threat yet. That opens up the lawsuits. That's very complex. Yep, so that's a lot more complex than the active shooter.
And that's something that we've certainly seen an increase based on our culture and what's acceptable as far as, a church talking about particular cultural related topics, and then someone feeling like maybe they don't agree, or maybe they're being persecuted, or whatever the story is. But I think one of the reasons it's so hard is because it's not predictable. Because when you have that individual come in, it's not a black and white situation. It's very gray in how, every situation is unique to that person based on what they choose to do, versus just have a gun and come in and start shooting.
Right. It's one thing to prepare for the potential ex-spouse because you're aware of the potential of that person. You know who they are, what they drive, who they might target. That's a lot of known, but the vast majority of what we deal with from a church perspective is the unknown. And I think that really hits the topic well tonight, is that unexpected. So Ed, tell us more your thoughts and years of experience and different things on that unexpected. How do you help coach a team? How do you help coach basically a group of volunteers that are civilians that the vast majority have not received any sort of first responder level training? What can you do to help them prepare for that unexpected?
Well, I think you need to train them, and training takes you need to train them on the threat so they understand the threat. They understand what might come, what to look for, and how they might act. So that goes back to the military of defining the threat so we know what we're up against. Define the environment in which we expect to fight the threat. Now, if we're going to go strictly to where I deal with, the active shooter, church active shooters are not members or attenders. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to immediately use force against anybody we see we don't recognize, obviously, but that tells us the past. They're not a member. They're not an attender. Now, they may have been there a few times. They may have been there to ask for handouts. They may have been there to recon, maybe acting like a potential member, saying, hey, I hear what you guys are about. I've read about you. Can you show me around? Can I attend a service? I'm thinking about joining. And of course, churches, sure, brother, come on in. That's what we're here for. So several of them have done that. And then they start in the parking lot. No, not all of them, but most of them start in the parking lot. So churches have to have security and not just a camera. They have to have people out in the parking lot. If we can identify him there and preferably stop him there, our chances of a low number are extremely high. So we train the team on what to look for. We train the team on the environment we expect to fight him, whether it be the parking lot or inside the building.
Yep.
We train them on options, and then we got to train them on their skill and their ability and their gear to the point that they're confident. Because when you reach the point that you're confident in your gear and your abilities, then even under stress, even under extreme fear, you can still operate successfully, not perfectly, but successfully. So you train them on their gear, and then once they reach that level, then you to the best of your ability, you put them in scenarios that are most like what you can build to simulate what their fight will be like. And then you build the scenario to require them to do exactly what you want them to do. And what I want people to do responding to an active shooter is to go, if it doesn't happen right in front of them, go towards the sound or the evidence and get close enough, positively identify the threat, get close enough for that person's distance, for their abilities, as far as using a weapon, and then as quickly as they can stop that threat without hurting anybody else. So you give them scenarios that they can get into and do that, because if they run 5, 6, 10 scenarios successfully, then what that builds is a file in their mind. And that's what their brain will revert to if they get in the real situation. And if they've done it successfully a number of times, yeah, I might be shaking. Yes, I might be fearful, but I can do it. And I told you I was just at the conference this past week with Stephen Williford, and he says, I was beyond scared. I didn't know that level of scared existed, but I was calm. I was extremely scared, but I was calm, and I could do what I needed to do. And that's what I think that's what we owe to our teams if we're going to have teams.
Absolutely.
And then not training, but what the church has to then do, or any other organization, is position their people correctly. Here's the magic. The magic happens when the person that's going to stop the active shooter attack is close enough to hear or see the shots, the first shots fired. Not somewhere on the property, not somewhere in the building, but they're close enough to hear or see the first shots. Because if the person that's going to stop it is close enough to hear it or see it, we eliminate the need for a 911 call, the police dispatch that results from that 911 call, the police travel time to travel to the location, the police entry into the building, which may be quick or it may not be, and then once they enter the building, for them to find the active shooter and put him down. All that takes a lot of time. All that time, the active shooter is carrying out his plan of shooting a lot of people. If the person that's going to stop it can hear it or see it, then they can aggressively get to him very quickly and stop it in the first 30 seconds. In our country, we've had 20 active shooter attacks where a person with a gun, a good person with a gun, was close enough to hear or see it and responded aggressively. In 18 of those 20, we have a single-digit victim count, 0 to 9. So that has a 90% success rate. And that's why, because if they're close enough to hear it or see it, they can end it really quickly. The most aggressive, well-trained police officer in the world that shows up 5 minutes after the first shot, the numbers are going to be high. That police officer may act very bravely and very aggressively and stop the attack, but it'll be too late to have low numbers. And I want low numbers. I'm tired of 20 and 30 and 40, which is what we continually see, because instead of us, people here, stopping it, we wait on somebody to eventually show up and stop it. So churches and other organizations, if they have armed teams, they just have to be smart about spreading them out so that no matter where it happens, one of them at least will hear it or see it. And of course, you have to go heavy on those locations that are most likely. Like for churches, it's the parking lot.
Sure. Absolutely.
I'm curious, have you seen any correlation with the amount of training in those responses where it was just one individual that was addressed?
Say that again. Or ask it.
So you said 18 out of 20, they were an individual was at the right place at the right time and addressed that threat.
Yes.
I'm curious if you have seen any similarities between all of their levels of training, like if they would all be considered more of a novice, or if it was something where they were always training and just trying to develop skill set with a heavy training mindset to handle that situation.
Don't have enough knowledge about each one, but most of them were not police officers.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Non-police officers stop these things more often quickly than police. And that's not because non-police officers are better. It's because non-police officers are there.
Correct.
Active shooters are just a subset of violent criminals. And violent criminals, all of them, most of them, don't want to start their violent crime right in front of a uniformed cop. So that's why the uniformed cop is not usually the one that stops it if it stops early. It's somebody else there that he didn't expect to be there with a gun that stops it. Jack Wilson from White Settlement, he was very well trained. He was a trainer. But then there's David George, the pastor up in Tumwater, Washington, that I'm now friends with. And I mean, he had shot a little bit, but no military experience, no law enforcement experience. So the three things that matter is, are you there, are you armed, and are you willing? The more training, obviously, the better. I train people for money. I'm very pro training, but it's more important that you're there and you're willing. The Parkland police, the SRO at Parkland High School had over 30 years of professional law enforcement training, but that didn't matter because he didn't go in the building. Yeah. So being there, being armed, being willing, if you don't have that great a skill and you really can't get hits past 6 yards, well, you just got to get within 6 yards and get your hit. So it's more important to have people there willing than to get hung up on better training.
Yeah. And one of the things that we talk to churches all the time we took a couple of our training sessions at my church, and we actually went in the sanctuary and we measured off just different distances, because we took everybody in and we said, look, if we had an active shooter situation, you came in with a firearm, you needed to eliminate the threat. How comfortable are you with shooting this distance? What is this distance? Like, in your mind, how far is this? And of course, when we started, everybody was like, right away, everyone was like, oh yeah, I could do that shot. No problem whatsoever. Yeah. And so we took them into the sanctuary, where our sanctuary seats 1,500 people. And so you can imagine that's a very vast, large room. Yep. And so we actually took a golf finder and measured off, what the actual footage and distance was. And we said, okay, now, this is 160 feet across the sanctuary. How many people do you know can adequately hit a target 160 feet away, moving or not moving, but, with a pistol? So when we crossed that, we said, okay, so this tells you two things. One, you need to know how far out you can hit and practice well. And the other thing is, you need to be moving, because if you see something on the other side, someone on the other side of the sanctuary, you need to be able to get across that room to that point where, okay, if I can hit somebody at 50, 60 feet successfully with the firearm that I'm carrying, I've got to bridge that, and I've got to get to that point where, I'm 60 feet away, so I can take that shot as quickly as possible.
Yeah, totally agree. So when we do training for this threat, one of the things we do is what I call the fade back drill. We start everybody at 5 yards, and we shoot randomly, not 10 in a row, but we shoot 1, then 3, then 2, then 1. We shoot a total of 10. And if all 10 out of 10 are within the chest circle, then you graduate that distance and you move back. So everybody finds out what my maximum distance, not to get a hit, not to get most hits, but to get 100% hits. And most people are surprised. Like, can you get this far of a shot? Yeah. If I try, 5, 6, 8 times, I'll probably hit it once or twice. That's not what we want. Right. Because the ones that don't hit him don't stop him, and they have the potential of hitting people we don't want to hit. Now, luckily, or maybe not luck, I don't know, no armed citizens has ever shot the wrong person responding to an active shooter. Cops have several times, but so far armed citizens haven't done that. So we got to know what our distance, and then, like you said, work within your distance. So if we three are on our church security team, and I'm the weakest skilled guy, I really can't I can't guarantee my hits past 7, then I'm probably not in the parking lot, and I'm probably not in the sanctuary. I'm probably in a place that has a better chance of a closer in shot. But if I do find myself in a bigger area, then I have to move closer to get within my distance. That's exactly right.
It's a great point there. I think what's good about that, James, and looking at that finder is understanding the competency, capability, and confidence of the team. And to your point, Ed, the willingness. Okay, are they willing to take that shot? Are they able to take that shot? If they're not, are the existing positions that we have within the role adequate? In other words, do we need another body? Should that body be over here? What's the likelihood of them being able to close the distance? So all of those things come into play when you're planning for your team and understanding your staffing model, for that matter, as well. Where you put somebody, I think you just mentioned there, Ed, is you got to put somebody in the right spot. You're not going to put them in the spot that's going to force them to take that longer shot. You're going to put them in a place that's going to be that shorter shot.
Yeah, if you have people that have longer range capability, they need to be in the longer range places. But if you have a sanctuary or another place that's just really, really big, then you don't have to put everybody along the wall. You can put people, position them within the seating, where they can be closer. And this is true that right before Jack Wilson killed that active shooter at White Settlement, I had a guy talking to a guy, and he said, you should never have armed people inside the sanctuary, because once the gun shooting goes off, people will go crazy and run everywhere, and it's just not safe. And Jack, almost everybody, I assume, has watched the video of Jack Wilson, and that's not true at all. When the natural human reaction to a gunshot or explosion is to get down, and they did. So you're going to have a 5 to 10 maybe second window there to where you'll have pretty much an open shot. And the same thing in the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting. In the interview with the active shooter by the court-appointed psychologist, he said, "Did you see the faces of the people you shot?" And the shooter said, "No." And the psychologist was kind of surprised, because the guy was looking right at everybody sitting in this theater shooting them. And he's like, "You didn't see the faces of any of the people you shot?" And he said, "Oh, no, they got down immediately. They got down behind the backs of the seats in front of them immediately when I started shooting." So that's what we can, again, teaching them about the environment we expect to fight them in. That's one of the things. The other thing is the fire alarm. You can pretty much expect the fire alarm to go off once the shooting starts, because the concussion causes dust to come out of the ceiling, and almost always indoor shootings, the fire alarm will go off.
Interesting. For sure. What, Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was kind of continuing on that vein is, again, the staffing model. Where do you put people at different times? I mean, it definitely calls into attention the shooting, and oftentimes I'll suggest, hey, is at minimum, whether you're doing the fade or whether you're doing different moving drills and things like that, you should always even take that opportunity, if you have some time, is take those longer shots. I mean, I've been to a training. They literally called it the Jack Wilson Challenge, and they put it out there, and they said, "All right, take that shot. Can you put it on steel from that distance?" And it was, yes, we've been shooting all day, and we're probably 300-400 rounds in at that point, but how many people actually were able to plink it versus not? And so it's something to think about, and builds that need for the individual to kind of introspectively look and say, all right, I may need to spend more time if they didn't hit it, or, hey, I just hit that, but I wasn't terribly confident in, I want to spend some more time doing that. And so you may actually find that your team speaks to you as a leader and says, hey, you know what, that was a great training. Can we do it again? And maybe we should do it more frequently. And that's the best scenario. Is it's always tough to get an entire team together to do a range day. But it doesn't require the entire team. You get 2 or 3 guys from the team, gals, whatever, and they can get out and get some range time in. That's a good thing.
And another thing we really stress, and the reason we stress 100% accuracy is because the saying is we talk about Rule 4, but we don't train Rule 4. And most places I am, Rule 4 of safety is be sure of your target and what's in line with your target, right? And we tell them that, we make them memorize it. Maybe it's even on a written test. And then what do? We take them out to a range where we don't let anybody out in front of them. God forbid, that would be too dangerous. And the only thing behind the target we tell them to shoot at is a big dirt wall or some other kind of bullet trap if it's an indoor. So we give them a very sterile, artificial range. and misses happen, because misses at the worst are, in a range, are embarrassing. Little embarrassing. You missed the target, but they safely went into the pile of dirt.
Right.
Well, there is no pile of dirt in your church or in the parking lot of your church, or God forbid if they're in the mall when this thing happens. So 100% hits are always the goal. And we show them that. We show them videos of the New York City Empire State Building shooting, where the 2 cops shot the guy, and they did shoot him and kill him at about 4 to 5 yards, but their bullets hit 9 innocent people. And the Dayton, Ohio, fairly close to you, James, the Dayton, Ohio shooting, where the cops did very aggressively respond and very effectively shoot the guy, hit him 30 times, but 2 of the cop bullets that day hit innocent people. So unlike the range where misses are at the most embarrassing, these are in malls and churches, by definition, pretty much an active shooting is going to take place in a very crowded place, because that's the target that they seek. So we have to we have to make sure our bullets stay inside the person that we're shooting.
And that's also something that I've had the conversation with the teams, is thinking, hey, if you were in your position where you're at now and you had to shoot somebody here, what's behind that wall? Can you tell me? And it's amazing how many times you get folks that even have been there for a long time that really actually haven't thought about, well, from that angle, I hadn't thought about what's actually behind that wall. Yep. And is that a solid enough wall? Is that going to stop that bullet, or is it not? And what does that look like? And I think that's even important from a standpoint. James and I talked to a lot of folks from a design and building standpoint as well, when they're looking at designing and putting together their church layout and giving feedback from a safety and security perspective. Well, sometimes it's as good as don't put the kids directly on the same wall as the sanctuary that's not super thick. You got to have some level of separation and ability to control it. So you got to understand those backstops with your team, and you got to make sure that they're understanding it. It's not just good enough for you to know as the leader. You got to have your team make sure they know what's behind each wall.
And if they do know that a wall will stop their bullets, then that allows them maybe to take a little more risk in their shooting.
Right.
I've been trained, they're called distraction rounds. If I have a decent capacity pistol, 15, 17 rounds, and I'm a little beyond my comfort zone distance to him, but I know he's in front of a wall that'll stop my bullets, then maybe I can take a little more risk in my shooting. So that's another thing about knowing the environment. Now, see, if as individuals, you don't know where you're going to hit the active shooter. It may be when you're in the dentist chair in the mall, but for the security team of the church, they know the environment that they will find there. So that's a strong benefit to know their own building.
And honestly, not every, and we've talked about this before too, but not every building is created equal, because, I know in my church was built back in, what was it, the 50s. And so we had cinder block walls and foundation. And as the church grew, they added on with different building supplies. And so, if you walk through our church, you just notice, as you walk through, it's like, okay, well, this is created different than the next 2 sessions. And you need to pay attention to what's going on, because where you're at, that certainly plays a role. Going back to the training component of it real quick, I know for us, one of the things when we everyone usually about once a year, and we're getting ready to do it again as a group. Now our folks go out and train far more individually, but we'll bring them together usually once a year and push through a day of really honing skills and trying to help them do better. And one of the things that we've noticed in doing that is that we all come together. I mean, it's a great day. Usually we throw some barbecue in there too, and have a good time. But one of the things that we've noticed is that we have everyone do the same thing, and even some of our instructors that come together will do the same. We put everybody on the same level that day, and we say, okay, it doesn't matter what your skill set is. This is, we want everybody to be on the same page. And I think that's important for two reasons. One, like you mentioned, Ed, it goes back and it makes sure that everybody is trained the same way and everyone has that success with knowing their distance. But the other piece too is that there's just no judgment. And I don't mean that from if you're not doing well, yeah, we need to help you, navigate better skills. But at the same time, I've seen in several of those situations with churches where it's like, okay, you get a bunch of people together and everybody's nervous that somebody's going to judge them or criticize their experience and how they do this and how they do that. And so the few times that we've done it, we've had a lot of success with just saying, look, check your egos at the door. Everybody's on the same page today. Everybody's willing to learn, and we're all going to go through this together so that we all know each other's strengths and weaknesses, but also move past some of those weaknesses and opportunities and learn how to do this better if something like this happens.
Yeah, the better you make the training, but that's okay. If they feel a little stressful, that's good, because training
Sure.
under a little bit of stress will help them if they have to perform under a lot of stress. So building competition, and it's not for, talking, pointing fingers, hey, I'm better than you, but competition has shown it puts us under a little bit of stress.
Sure.
And I would say out of all the types of groups we train, probably the church security team is the widest variety of skill level and equipment. So if they come out and they see people better than them, they're like, well, I can be that good. Not by wishing it, not by hoping it, but
Sure.
through training I can. Or maybe, so when we do the feedback, it's like, this is your max distance. So are you happy with that? If you're okay with that, then work to sustain it. Work to get very confident with that. If you're not, if you would like to improve it, we can do training things and we can do gear things. Maybe a bigger gun that's easier to shoot well. Maybe it's sights, but there's changes we can make to improve most people to a certain level. But yeah, put them under a little bit of stress. And I'd say a couple times, when I've trained church teams, a couple times I have to get with the leader of the team and say, hey, are you seeing what I'm seeing in Ed over here? Not saying he can't help the church somehow in security, but he's probably not a gun toter.
Yeah.
And let the leader take him out. Because we start with just a basic safe gun handling skills assessment. And if the person is unsafe or they're at extremely low skill, that's not going to get better as we back up from the target. And it's not going to get better as we start shooting on the move. And it's really not going to get better when we put them under the stress of an actual scenario with 3D mannequin targets. Sometimes, sometimes maybe twice I've had to get the leader to tell the person, hey, maybe later, but today you're going to have to step back and observe. And that's okay. You can still serve, but just not as an armed person today.
Sure.
Yep.
And that's definitely important to keep in mind too. We had a couple of years ago when we did actually the first time where we started training folks and we brought everybody to one location and we were going through a lot of different drills and stuff like that. And we had really had the time to get folks to look at their equipment, see what kind of holsters they were using, what type of firearms they were using. And it was really interesting. It was very eye-opening to us, because what we found was, you're absolutely right. People tend to purchase firearms that they're comfortable with, and there's not a lot of consistency with church safety teams. I mean, a lot of times folks will come up to me and say, well, what do you carry? And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter necessarily to an extent what I carry. You need to be able to be competent with what you have from a brand name perspective is what I mean. Because a lot of times folks will come in and they'll say, well, I've seen how you shoot. What type of gun do you have? Oh, you carry a Glock? Okay, I'm gonna go buy a Glock and carry that as well. So what would you wrapping up here, what would you say about like just the training equipment and equipment in general for like a church safety team?
Well, it's just what we teach people about handguns. The bigger the gun, now not counting you can get too big for some people's hands, but the bigger the gun, the easier it is to handle and manipulate, the easier and more comfortable it is to shoot effectively. So bigger is always better if you have a choice, but the church team, I would imagine, is going to carry concealed. So we also have to have a balance if they're not willing to carry the biggest. But try to get them toward carrying the bigger guns that are just easier to shoot, don't recoil as much, hold more ammunition. I mean, I can shoot a Glock 1917 better than I can a Glock 43X or a 48. They're both great, reliable guns, but just having more surface area gives you more controllability. And then I would say harder than the gun is the holster, because most holsters sold out there are not good concealment holsters. And get them to get a good concealment holster for that gun that they choose, at least for now, and then get really good with it. You know, if we can, I'm not real picky about the exact type of gun, but I'm saying if you got a Ruger LCP in your pocket, that you're probably that might be minimally adequate to get the mugger off of you in the parking lot, but not to take on the active shooter with the pump shotgun. Okay?
Exactly.
Well, and that's honestly, that was one of those aha moments with the light bulb coming on when we did our first training, because everybody started pulling those out, and I'm like, okay, you know, I have an LCP in my gun safe. At one point in time, probably about 15 years ago, I thought, wow, that would be a great concealed carry gun. And guess where it's sitting right now? In my gun safe. Because, you know, as I've learned and certainly as I've trained with it, yeah, I mean, it's great if you're 10 feet away from somebody and, you know, and that's all you have. But in real, you know, in realistic fashion, it's like, okay, is that really something you want to be practicing with, where, you know, you're probably not going to be as effective with that across the sanctuary, like even with a Jack Wilson shot or something like that.
And I think that's the difference too, is specifically even in a church scenario, is I get it if one thing, if you choose that your personal carry firearm is that firearm, but you should also be training with something perhaps that is a little bit more stopping power, a little bit better accuracy, a little bit fuller frame, a little bit better for your grip, etc. And make sure that when you're on post, when you're covering for a safety team, you probably shouldn't be carrying the little 6-shot. Whether it's LCP or whether it's a bodyguard or whether it's a shield, any number of those. I've seen so many teams that's what's coming out of their pocket.
Well, and that goes back to the thing of you need to train them on what this threat is, of what they're here for. So you show them that they're more likely to face a rifle or a shotgun. So do you really want to go up against this evil person with a rifle or a shotgun with X little pocket pistol? And then you show them that Gina Psalm shot that guy 10 times, and he still ended it with one in his own mouth. That the St. Cloud Mall shot him 3 times, fell, got up, shot him 3 times, fell, got back up. So you show them several of these shootings, took 30 hits from the cops at Dayton to put that guy on the ground. So you show them these threats, that these aren't Star Trek phasers that will immediately incapacitate somebody if you touch them with a bullet. And not how many shots it might take, but how many hits it might take. And that helps them to and then you show them that the bigger guns, yes, they're a little less convenient to carry, but man, are they easier to shoot well.
Well, and that reminds me of the more recent mall shooting in Indiana. The gentleman, in 15 seconds, the active shooter came out and shot like 3 or 4 people, and the young man that returned fire, like drew a firearm and shot him, had a Glock 17, and he shot 10 times, and out of the 10 times, he hit the guy 8 times before it actually dropped him. And, with that situation again, and that was, I believe if I remember correctly, it was between 45 and 50. I think it was about 45 yards that he was away, but I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure the exact distance, but it was definitely a distance where most people would say, I'm not comfortable with taking that shot. And, and he navigated it. And when they asked him, hey, how did you get to be such a good shot? His response was, well, my grandfather and I used to shoot all the time, and we do that as a hobby. So,
yeah. For any organization that has 911 as a part of their solution to stop the active shooter, if 911 is required to put their plan in place to stop the active shooter, they're guaranteed double digits, because you'll be at 10 or more people shot by the time the first 911 operator gets the first call. And then you'll probably be at 20 by the time that 911 call you made turns into a dispatch, which turns into police travel and arrival. So if you don't want double digits and probably 20 plus, then you cannot rely on a phone call to stop this thing. You want to stop it. You people there want to stop it and be treating casualties and on your third cigarette by the time the first cop pulls up in the parking lot. That should be the goal of every organization.
So I guess I got to take up smoking now, Mike.
I'm not sure I'm going with that one, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I mean, even nowadays, that's if the cops come in, if they don't stand around.
Yep.
I mean, heaven forbid for some of that situation, but. Just a closing thought, I realize we're running out of time here, is, again, preparing for the unexpected. Really, it's 4 things. You got to plan. You got to prepare. That preparation requires inventorying what you currently have, what you've prepared for already, what you're capable of doing, what your team is capable of doing, what resources you have to respond with or need to do, where your gaps are, what you're missing in your training. Test that over and over again, and then train and fill those gaps. And finally, make sure you're always communicating to your team.
For sure.
And I'm out.
That pretty much sounds like a gold nugget right there. We'll put that later on the website for sure. But anyhow, Ed, we're really out of time, but again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on and chatting about that.
Enjoyed it. Thanks.
No, it's been great. And if you ever make it to Central Texas, I'll certainly look you up and try to catch you.
I'll be in Dallas at least twice, but I haven't got anything rigged in Austin yet.
Austin is the belly of the beast down here. It's not quite as busy as the Fort Worth, Dallas hub or the San Antonio hubs that I've seen, but it's growing rapidly. But yes, as James said, thanks for coming on. Appreciate having you.
You're welcome. I loved it.
Thanks. All right, so real quick, just wrapping up. Again, you're welcome. I believe there's still tickets available. You're welcome to come visit us next Saturday, August 13th, at the NOC SSM conference in Dallas. We'll be at the Watermark Community Church, and it's going to be a great day, lots of great training, and we'll have a table there, and we'd love to talk to you if you have the opportunity. But as always, you can visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com for more resources and just helpful information to help you and your team protect your members, protect your community, and do all of that from a good place. So, as always, if we can be of any assistance or help to you all, please feel free to reach out, and we will talk to you next week. So take care. God bless. Have a great week.
This hour of broadcasting brought to you by TwoWayRadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast, brought to you by Vigilant Impact. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback and interaction. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams. join the discussion online, and connect with us on social media. For other great ministry resources, download the Church Security app or at our website at churchsafetyguys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and semper disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.